Hello and welcome to the viewers of this video. This is the Orange Fan here, bringing you another entry for the franchise overview. The franchise that we'll be talking about in this video is one of Nickelodeon's more recent entries, The Loud House. For those unfamiliar with the show, The Loud House is about a boy, an 11-year-old boy by the name of Lincoln Loud, voiced by Sean Ryan Fox in the pilot/first short, Grant Palmer in the second short and the first 22 episodes, and Colin Dean starting with the 23rd episode and continuing on to the present day, at least at the time of the recording of this video. Now, Lincoln is actually the middle child, the very literal middle child, in fact, of a family of 11 with 5 older siblings and 5 younger siblings, and they're all his sisters. Now, the sisters are, from oldest to youngest, Lori, voiced by Catherine Tabor, who is 17 years old, Lenny, who is 16 years old, voiced by Liliana Mummy, who is a fashion designer. Although she's not the brightest bulb, she is very gifted and skilled when it comes to making crafts or designing fashion-related stuff, as you would expect of a fashion designer. 15-year-old Luna, voiced by Nika Furman, is the musician of the family. She is quite a big fan of a parody of Mick Jagger by the name of Mick Swagger. 14-year-old Luann, voiced by Christina Pukeli, is the comedian of the family, giving out a lot of puns and very fond of pranks, but also a professional clown. Her pranks are also especially notable on April Fool's Day. 13-year-old Lynn, voiced by Jessica DeSico, is the athlete of the family, participates in so many different sports teams, and can be very competitive. Of the younger sisters, we have 8-year-old Lucy, also voiced by Jessica DeSico, who is both gothic and a poet. Next up is the 6-year-old twins, Lana and Lola, both voiced by Gray Griffin, previously known as Gray Delisle. Lana is technically the older of the two, and she's also the family's handy person, taking care of maintenance around the house, but also looks over a lot of animals besides the overall family pets. Lola, on the other hand, is a pageant contestant, and she has won many awards in all of the pageants she has partook in. Lisa, the 4-year-old, voiced by Lara Jill Miller, is a genius who already graduated from college. In fact, she actually occasionally teaches at the college. And lastly, we have the baby, Lily, also voiced by Gray Griffin. She is 1 year old, but if you want to be really specific, she's 15 months. And, well, there isn't really much you can really say about the baby. And yeah, I didn't really mention too much about Lori either. Admittedly, she's not the most quirky of the sisters, but there are other depths to her. Like, supplementary material does mention Lori wishes to be a CEO one day, and we'll discuss other stuff relating to Lori as we look into the episodes in greater detail. Now, some of the recurring roles in the show include the McBride family. The son, Clyde, is voiced by Kaylee Harris, and he's Lincoln's best friend. His parents also do show up from time to time, and we'll get to them in future videos. And of course, the Loud parents are also major recurring characters. The dad is voiced by Brian Stepanek, and the mom is voiced by Jill Talley, who is the wife of Tom Kenny, best known as the voice of SpongeBob SquarePants himself. Jill Talley actually plays Karen, the computer wife, on SpongeBob. Now, the show takes place in a fictional city called Royal Woods, Michigan. Now, the creator of the show, Chris Savino, actually was born and for his childhood lived in Royal Oak. Now, I've heard some sources claim Royal Woods is just a different name to reference Royal Oak, but I've also seen some sources say that it's a combination of Royal Oak and another city in Michigan. If that's true, I haven't found what the other city it was named after is, but I'm still trying to look for that just to verify if that is the case or not. But in any case, I'm just glad to see the Mitten State get some representation on TV. Oh, and some other recurring roles include the Santiago family, who we'll talk more about them as we see more episodes relating to them. So that's something you can look forward to. Now, what do I think of the Loud House? Now, with the general description I gave, it does sound a bit like other shows with big families like The Brady Bunch and Cheaper by the Dozen. Actually, funny enough, Lenny's voice artist, Liliana Mummy, was one of the Baker kids in the Steve Martin Cheaper by the Dozen movies. So this isn't her first time that she's played a character in a big family. Now, here is something that my professor from one of my more recent creative writing classes, he gave us a very good lesson that really stuck to me. When we were trying to make ideas for stories as the projects in that class, he told us not to worry about if the idea's been done before or not, because he said what matters most is how it's executed. And that's what I feel too. While if you break Loud House down into its more bare minimum essentials, it may sound similar to Cheaper by the Dozen or Brady Bunch, but when you look at how it's executed, it is done differently. I will admit that class is also why I feel calling something cliche is kind of a pet peeve of mine. It's there along with overrated, underrated, and cringe. I do not like those words in the slightest bit. But yeah, essentially I feel calling something cliche just isn't a strong argument. It just feels like dismissing something just because you've seen the idea before, never mind how it's executed. But for me, it's more, if the idea is well executed, it's fine with me. I mean, that's why we have a lot of stories about good versus evil. Some are not so well executed, but others execute it very well. And yeah, so for me, execution is key. And that's actually where my enjoyment and the parts I don't like about the show comes into play is how it's executed. And I feel at its best, on the best days, Loud House really is a fun and enjoyable show that does talk about what it's like to be with family, how you deal with siblings, and some other slice of life stuff. And I myself only had one sibling, an older brother, and yeah, we didn't always get along. We'd have our fights and disagreements, but at the end of the day, we always mended fences, and yeah, we're overall on good terms. We're good. We're cool. And so even though I only had one sibling compared to Lincoln having 10 of them, I still, think I can feel what it's like to have siblings. And I do feel they do get that sometimes, siblings won't always get along, but they can pull through in the end. And that's where, unfortunately, also the downside, the parts I'm not too keen on about the show comes, is when it's not executed well. Because, like I said, siblings aren't going to get along with each other all the time, but when it's not well executed, it can come off, admittedly, a bit mean-spirited. And now, true, it is a cartoon, and sometimes that is going to be more over the top and not the kind of stuff you'd expect to see in real life. But again, execution is important. To give you an idea about that, Etta and Eddie and even Nickelodeon's own Cat Dog were shows that a lot of people thought were a bit on the mean-spirited side, but I felt it was executed well enough where I didn't really feel like, oh, that seems not quite goods, or that seemed uncalled for. Because with Ed, Edd and Eddie, it felt like a really zany Looney Tunes-esque sort of cartoon. And to be fair, that does happen with Loud House sometimes. There are some segments that do feel like just an over-the-top Looney Tunes or Tom and Jerry, or maybe more appropriately Screwy Squirrel, given certain segments that I actually feel, yeah, I'm cool with this. But other times I can make myself feeling we're supposed to be glad that this person got hit with this. Well, to give you a better idea of what I mean, let's take a moment to talk about Looney Tunes, actually, even, to actually siege into that. Well, now originally Bugs Bunny would usually battle against Elmer Fudd, but at a certain point, there were many viewers, and later on, even some of the staff came to feel that Bugs came off as kind of a jerk and thought that he was being too mean to Elmer or disproportionately antagonistic to Elmer, even though we were supposed to root against Elmer. It was actually because of that they ended up having to create Yosemite Sam, who was much more antagonistic, much less sympathetic, so we could actually root for Bugs. Now, what was the point of me mentioning that Looney Tunes example? Well, I do feel that sometimes there is a tendency where the show kind of does make Lincoln into its chew toy. That's to say, I do feel sometimes when Lincoln does get a raw deal, it can be... the execution really does not paint it in a pretty picture. Now, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that Lincoln is perfect or he does no wrong, because unfortunately there are some fans out there that don't seem to realize that Lincoln is a flawed kid. He can have his moments of being selfish. He can have his moments of being a jerk. But also, he is still overall a good kid, and while he's not perfect, he does at least make up for his mistakes, learns from them, and mends fences, and that's all we really can ask of ourselves. Now, when it comes to his sisters, again, unfortunately, there are some viewers that have a bad habit of exaggerating how malicious his sisters are. They really aren't personified evil by any means. But admittedly, there are times where, while Lincoln does more or less make up for his mistakes, there have been times where his sisters, let's just say that they usually don't have to pay the price for their misdemeanors as Lincoln does sometimes, and usually they can end up getting away with it, or being karma Houdinis, if you will. Whereas many fans would say that Lincoln never really gets away with anything bad. Actually, some people would argue whether Lincoln ever got away with any misdemeanors or not is kind of a big debate among certain parts of the fandom from what I saw. But overall, most would agree, while Lincoln's not blameless, and while his sisters aren't irredeemable by any means, there does seem to be an imbalance where when Lincoln does something wrong, sometimes his punishment can be very excessive compared to what his misdemeanor was. A case of disproportionate retribution, if you will. Or sometimes Lincoln does have a part of blame in the conflict, but he's not the only character at fault, yet he's still the only one made to pay for it. While there are times where his sisters, while again not without their kind moments and not without their sympathetic moments, can tend to get away with their misdemeanors a bit more often than they really should. And I do agree that is a bit of an unfair imbalance. And there are times where I am asking myself, were we really supposed to sympathize with his sisters there? Were we really supposed to be glad that Lincoln got hit that hard over what might be seen as a minor mistake? Or... well, it's definitely something where we'll have to talk about that in greater detail within the episodes. It's a lot easier to pinpoint exactly where I feel like, okay, this is a good example where Lincoln was in the wrong and he got a reasonable comeuppance for it. Or this is an example where Lincoln may have done something wrong, but the punishment was too excessive to justify what happened to him. Or this is a good example where Lincoln and his sisters were all at fault and they all got their reasonable comeuppance to it. Or this is a case where Lincoln was scapegoated as the cause of all the problems when his sisters were partially at fault too. But yeah, don't let my grievances with those not so pleasant moments fool you. I do think at its best, it still is an enjoyable show. It actually is a lot like what I feel about King of the Hill. King of the Hill is one of my favorite shows of all time, but at the same time, I'm not very thrilled with the episodes where Hank was made into the scapegoat for whatever problem happened in the episode, or the episodes where his family and friends turned against him because of a hive mind or mob mentality, or it convenienced them to do so. And that happened quite a bit. But despite that, I still overall enjoyed the show. That's where I'm getting at too with Loud House. While I'm not fond of episodes where Lincoln gets made into a chew toy, or where I think he gets unreasonably punished for a really minor mistake, and where other characters, not necessarily just his family, gets away with a slap on the wrist. But at the same time, I really do enjoy when it's, yes, Lincoln was in the wrong and he got a reasonable comeuppance. But yeah, that was quite a bit longer than expected, but I definitely do have a lot of thoughts about this franchise, and you can definitely expect to see more of it in the future. Take care, and until next time.